The calendar notification on my desktop computer chimed softly, breaking the steady hum of the afternoon office. It was a reminder for my quarterly performance review with Walter Finch, scheduled for 3:30 in the afternoon, which was still 2 hours away. I had plenty of time to finish my lunch, review my project files, and prepare my talking points. I stabbed at my chicken salad, my mind already rehearsing the highlights of my recent analytical successes. Suddenly, a shadow fell across my keyboard. I looked up to see Walter Finch standing over my desk, his expression completely unreadable and his posture stiff. The open workspace around us was filled with the usual murmur of phone conversations and keyboard clicks, but Walter's presence immediately brought a tense silence to my immediate vicinity. He adjusted his tie and spoke in a flat, demanding voice, informing me that the executives from the Kensington Group had just arrived and were waiting in the primary conference room. My fork clattered against the plastic lunch container. I stared at him, my heart skipping a beat, and pointed out that our meeting with the Kensington Group was officially scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Walter checked his expensive watch and smiled, though the expression did not reach his eyes. He told me that plans had changed, and that I had exactly 2 minutes to get downstairs. I protested, explaining that the presentation deck was not finalized. The printed materials were still at the off-site print shop, and the data prototype was not fully assembled. Walter simply shrugged, stepped back, and told me not to keep the client waiting. As he strode away down the carpeted hallway, a cold wave of realization hit me. This was not a scheduling mistake. This was a deliberate ambush. The Kensington Group represented the biggest potential account of our fiscal year, a $10 million contract that I had been personally cultivating for 6 months. Tomorrow's meeting was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my career, but Walter was forcing me into the room empty-handed. My stomach tightened into a hard knot as I reached for my phone. My company laptop was currently locked in a mandatory system operating update and would not be usable for at least 20 minutes. I had no slides, no physical handouts, and no product model. In the elevator ride down to the basement conference rooms, I desperately tried to access our team servers remotely. But our company's strict security protocols blocked all cloud access from mobile devices. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw them. 6 impeccably dressed executives were seated around the mahogany table, some scrolling through their tablets, others checking their watches with visible impatience. At the head of the table sat Victoria Kensington herself, the chief executive officer of the client group, who rarely attended initial pitches. Walter was waiting in the corridor, intercepting me before I could reach the door. He asked where my presentation materials were, his voice a harsh whisper. I told him they were on my desktop, exactly where they were supposed to be for tomorrow's scheduled session. He smiled tightly, adjusted his collar, and warned me not to embarrass the firm. When we stepped inside, Walter's demeanor transformed instantly into professional warmth. He welcomed the clients and introduced me as the project lead who would be walking them through our analytical proposal. He apologized for the minor scheduling confusion and claimed I was fully prepared. I watched him slide toward the back corner of the room near the exit, placing himself in the perfect position. If by some miracle things went well, he would step forward to claim the credit. If I failed, he was far enough away to distance himself from the disaster. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting. I had nothing but my phone, a blank notepad, and a mind racing to find a route out of this trap. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I thanked them for their time, and before opening any notes, I asked Victoria Kensington a direct question. I asked her what the primary operational challenge was that she hoped our analytics platform would solve. The room fell silent, and Walter shifted nervously near the door. My name is Kevin Campbell. I am 50 years old, and until that ambush in the conference room, I was considered the rising star at Synergy Analytics. 5 years of working 60-hour weeks had earned me the lead position on our most valuable corporate accounts. My colleagues called me the problem solver because I looked past standard playbooks to find solutions that others missed. My relationship with Walter Finch, however, had been strained since he became my senior director 11 months ago. Walter had transferred from our defunct Chicago office, which had collapsed under his management. From his first week, he viewed my independent style with deep suspicion, telling me that challenging established protocols was a sign of insubordination. 3 weeks before the Kensington meeting, I had openly questioned his standardized sales strategy during a leadership briefing, showing data that we had lost 2 major accounts due to his refusal to customize our services. Walter had smiled tightly and suggested we discuss it offline, but we never did. Instead, I found myself excluded from meetings, my emails went unanswered, and my projects were slowly reassigned. The Kensington opportunity was my last chance to prove my value, and Walter had turned it into an execution block. Victoria Kensington exchanged a quiet glance with her chief financial officer. "We covered this extensively in our preliminary discussions with your director," he said, his tone dry. I maintained my composure and replied that while those initial discussions were valuable, restating the core issue often reveals hidden insights that standard templates overlook. I suggested that perhaps we had been approaching their operational bottleneck from the wrong angle. By the door, Walter shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his cuffs. This was not the stammering apology and immediate request for rescheduling that he had anticipated from me. I had absolutely nothing to lose, so I chose to speak with absolute honesty. "Your company is not struggling with data visualization," I continued, looking directly at Victoria. "You have an exceptionally talented team of internal analysts. What you lack is predictive modeling for emerging market segments where consumer behavior does not follow historical trends." Victoria raised her eyebrows slightly, leaning forward. It was clear I had struck a vital nerve. For the next 15 minutes, I asked structured questions about their supply chain disruptions and shifting customer demographics. With each exchange, the executives around the table became more engaged, offering detailed feedback. Walter attempted to interrupt, suggesting that we should reschedule the meeting, since I did not have the official slides prepared. Victoria raised her hand to silence him, stating that this active discussion was far more valuable than reviewing another slide deck. She looked back at me and asked how we would structure the data flow. I stood up and walked to the dry erase board, sketching a basic architectural framework from memory. I explained how our customized approach would integrate their regional metrics and build a real-time predictive engine. I was rebuilding my entire 6-week proposal on that board, adapting it to their active feedback in real time. I explained the 3 core layers of the system: data ingestion from local retail systems, cultural trend normalization, and predictive consumer mapping. Victoria nodded, her chief financial officer taking rapid notes. 30 minutes into the meeting, Victoria stood up. The room fell silent as she gathered her notebook. "This discussion has taken an unexpected turn," she said. Walter stepped forward, his mouth open to apologize for my lack of materials. "We came here expecting a standard presentation," Victoria continued, looking at Walter before turning her gaze to me. "Instead, Kevin has identified critical operational issues we had not fully acknowledged ourselves." She stepped toward me and handed me her business card, suggesting that we should continue this conversation, but not with Synergy Analytics. She asked me to contact her assistant to arrange a private meeting. As the Kensington executives filed out of the room, Walter's expression shifted from embarrassed confusion to absolute fury. The heavy glass door swung shut, leaving the two of us alone in the silent room. He slammed his folder onto the table, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I replied that I was simply doing my job and trying to secure the account. He shouted that I had just cost the company a $10 million contract by going completely off script, ruining our corporate reputation in front of our most critical prospect. I slipped Victoria's card into my jacket pocket and remarked that the client seemed far more interested in my solutions than his rigid templates, which had clearly bored them from the beginning. His eyes narrowed in cold rage as he warned me that this was not over and that I would pay for this defiance. The elevator ride back to our department floor was silent and tense. The moment we stepped out, Walter grabbed my shoulder and ordered me into his office immediately. Several colleagues looked up from their cubicles, then quickly looked away, sensing the danger. Walter shut his office door with controlled precision and demanded an explanation. I remained standing, telling him that I had adapted to the sudden scheduling change he created. I asked if he would have preferred that I tell the client he had deliberately sabotaged the presentation. Walter laughed nervously, claiming that plans change in business and that adaptability is part of the job description. He asserted that the meeting was moved up by the client and that he had informed me as soon as he was notified. We both knew he was lying, but pointing it out would only accelerate the confrontation. I simply stood my ground. Walter leaned against his desk and declared that my behavior was insubordinate. He accused me of building a personal relationship with the client instead of representing the interest of the firm. He opened his laptop and announced that he would be handling all future communications with the Kensington Group, ordering me to forward any emails I received from them and to copy him on all responses. He dismissed me with a cold wave of his hand. When I returned to my desk, I found a department-wide email from Walter stating that all client communications must now go through management approval and that individual team leadership on new business was suspended. The message was clear. He was systematically stripping away my authority and setting up a barrier to ensure I could never succeed here again. The weekend was slowly approaching, but the political atmosphere inside the office remained incredibly suffocating. On Friday morning, I received a quiet text message from Rachel Miller in the finance department, asking if we could meet for lunch at a small deli located 3 blocks away from our headquarters. When I arrived at the designated spot, Rachel was already seated in a corner booth looking exceptionally anxious and constantly glancing toward the door. She did not waste time with pleasantries, telling me without preamble that Walter had formally requested IT administration to monitor all my corporate email accounts, citing business continuity concerns. She lowered her voice to a whisper and added that Walter had also instructed finance to calculate my severance package, meaning they were actively building a case to terminate my employment by Monday morning. I sat back in the booth, the harsh reality of the situation settling into my mind. I had done nothing wrong, but Walter's brother-in-law was a close associate of our chief executive officer, which gave him significant political cover within the company hierarchy. Rachel slid a small, silver flash drive across the table, explaining that it contained my performance reviews from the past 5 years, client testimonials and internal revenue reports, showing my direct financial contributions to the firm. She told me to keep it safe, noting that I was legally entitled to these documents anyway, even if the management tried to lock me out of the systems. I thanked her sincerely, asking why she was risking her own position to help me in such a visible conflict. Rachel looked at me with a serious expression and reminded me of the situation 2 years ago, when a senior director named Stuart Lawson had harassed her, and the Human Resources Department had tried to sweep it under the rug. I had gone directly to the executive board with witness statements and evidence, forcing Stuart Lawson's dismissal. Rachel said that some people in this office still remembered who stood up for them when it mattered most, and she was not about to watch me get destroyed by a vindictive manager. Back at my desk that afternoon, I received an email from Victoria's assistant, Amanda Porter, requesting to schedule a formal meeting for Tuesday morning at their downtown headquarters. As ordered by Walter, I immediately forwarded the message to him, asking for his guidance and review. His response came within minutes, a single sentence telling me that he would handle all communications and that I should not reply to the client. 20 minutes later, Amanda Porter sent another email to my personal address, which I had shared with her during the initial pitch, noting that they had received no response from our company and asking if Tuesday worked for me. The conflict was clear. If I followed Walter's orders, the client would walk away, assuming we were unprofessional. If I responded to the client, Walter would use it as cause for my immediate termination due to insubordination. I decided to bypass our corporate network entirely. That evening, using my personal computer from home, I sent a brief, professional message to Amanda Porter, explaining that an internal conflict of interest had arisen and asking her to forward my personal phone number to Victoria Kensington. Within an hour, my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Victoria was on the line, asking for clarification. I explained the situation with absolute professional composure, detailing how the meeting had been moved without my knowledge, how my access to files had been restricted, and how my emails were being monitored by management. I told her that I was not looking for sympathy or intervention, but that I believed she deserved to know the truth about the operational friction at Synergy Analytics. There was a long silence on the line. Victoria asked if the predictive model I had sketched on the board was entirely my own work. I confirmed that it was, developed over 6 weeks of independent research and testing. She then asked if I was free to meet the following morning at 7 o'clock at the Riverside Cafe on Oakwood Street. She told me to come alone and to bring absolutely no materials belonging to my current employer. I agreed, and the line went dead. The next morning I sat in the corner booth of the quiet cafe, watching the rain beat against the glass window. Victoria arrived precisely at 7, dressed in a sharp business suit, but without her usual entourage of executives and assistants. She ordered black coffee and began by telling me that she had been in corporate development for 27 years and she knew how to read executive dynamics. She asked why Walter Finch wanted me to fail so badly. I explained the history of our division, including my criticism of his rigid templates and his subsequent attempts to isolate me from my clients to protect his own position. Victoria smiled thinly and revealed a crucial piece of history. She explained that Walter had previously run the Chicago branch of a logistics firm that had contracted with her company. His standardized methods had caused severe operational delays, leading her to terminate their contract early. Walter had recognized the Kensington name on our prospect list and feared that she would expose his history of incompetence to our board of directors. He had attempted to lock me out of the presentation to prevent Victoria from seeing a customized approach that would highlight his own failures. It was a desperate act of self-preservation that had backfired completely, and she had no intention of letting him succeed in his scheme. Victoria opened a leather folder on the table, revealing a detailed employment contract. She offered me the position of Director of Strategic Solutions at the Kensington Group, with a starting salary that was double my current compensation plus a comprehensive benefit package and relocation options. She stated that she valued analytical thinkers who could identify real problems rather than those who simply read from slides. I looked at the document, feeling a profound sense of relief, but I told her that I needed until Monday morning to review the details and make my final decision. She agreed, telling me I had until 9 o'clock on Monday to call her office. I spent the weekend discussing the transition with my family and reviewing the legal regulations. By Sunday night, my path was clear. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30, using the quiet time to pack my personal belongings into my briefcase. At 7:55, I walked into Walter's office for the performance review. He was sitting at his desk, with Paul Fisher from our legal department standing nearby with a grave expression. Walter closed the door with a firm click and slid a document toward me, his face set in a hard, triumphantly cold expression. He announced that they had evidence of me using personal accounts to communicate with clients and bypassing company protocols, which constituted a breach of company policy. He stated that they were terminating my employment for cause, effective immediately, and offered a severance agreement that included 2 weeks of pay in exchange for my cease and signature on a strict non-compete clause. I looked at the severance agreement but did not touch it. I looked Walter in the eye and told him that I was well aware of his history in Chicago and how his previous failures had led to the termination of the Kensington contract there. I explained that he had sabotaged the meeting because he was terrified Victoria would recognize him and report his past incompetence to our chief executive officer. Walter's face went completely pale, his eyes darting toward Paul Fisher. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a formal letter, and placed it on the desk. I informed them that I was resigning my position, effective immediately. Walter recovered his composure and sneered that my resignation did not release me from the 12-month non-compete clause in my original employment agreement. I smiled and suggested that Paul Fisher review clause 17B of that contract. Paul Fisher pulled my personnel file and scanned the pages, his expression hardening as he read the text. He turned to Walter and whispered that the non-compete restriction was explicitly tied to either a termination for cause or the acceptance of a severance package. Since I had resigned before they could execute the termination, and since I was refusing the severance pay, the non-compete restrictions were completely inapplicable under our state laws. I stood up, picked up my briefcase, and walked out of the office. Walter shouted after me, claiming I would never work in this industry again, but his voice was filled with empty panic. That afternoon, I called Victoria and formally accepted her offer. I requested a 2-week delay before my official start date, explaining that I had some personal business to conclude. She agreed, wishing me luck. During those 2 weeks, I did not rest. I contacted several former clients who had left Synergy Analytics during Walter's tenure, asking them about their reasons for leaving. They all described a pattern of neglect and rigid operational templates that had harmed their business. More importantly, I discovered something far more serious. One client shared an intellectual property assignment agreement that Walter had submitted to them, which purportedly bore my signature, transferring the rights of my predictive modeling software to Synergy Analytics. The document was dated 3 months ago, but I had never seen it. I contacted Rachel Miller, who was still working in finance. Over a quiet dinner at a small, dimly lit Italian restaurant near her apartment, I explained my suspicions about Walter's actions. Rachel listened carefully and agreed to help, promising to access the internal document control logs from her system during her off hours to find the truth. 2 days later, she delivered the digital audit logs. The metadata showed that the digital signature token associated with my name had been applied to the document at 5:36 on a Thursday morning from a remote IP address. That IP address belonged to Walter's corporate laptop, which he had used while working from a hotel during a conference. He had copied my digital signature file from a shared project folder and forged my authorization to secure the intellectual property rights for the firm. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forging a digital signature is a felony. Because the signature was forged, the entire assignment agreement was void ab initio, meaning the company had no legal claim to my software, and Walter had committed a serious criminal offense. I spent the remaining days of my transition organizing this data into a comprehensive portfolio, preparing to defend my work and expose the director's actions to the highest levels of corporate leadership. On my first official day at the Kensington Group, I met with Victoria and her legal counsel, presenting the digital audit logs and the forged assignment agreement. Victoria recognized the opportunity immediately. As the primary client of Synergy Analytics, she scheduled an emergency meeting with their executive board, including the chief executive officer. I accompanied Victoria to the meeting. Walking into the familiar executive suite of my former employer, Nicholas Albright and the other board members were seated around the table, looking surprised and slightly defensive to see me walk in with their primary prospective client. Victoria did not waste time with corporate small talk. She informed the board that she was prepared to sign a multi-year contract with Kensington Group's new Director of Strategic Solutions, but that she felt obligated to share some alarming discoveries regarding their internal management practices. She placed my folder of evidence on the table, detailing Walter's systematic sabotage of the Kensington account, his history of operational failures, and the clear evidence of forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. She explained that Walter had deliberately scheduled the Kensington meeting a day early to prevent me from presenting a customized solution, hoping to hide his own past incompetence in Chicago from the board. She showed them how his actions had directly damaged their relationship with her company. Furthermore, she presented the audit logs proving Walter had illegally accessed my digital signature to forge a transfer of my intellectual property. She explained that Walter's actions constituted a severe breach of fiduciary duty to Synergy Analytics, exposing the corporation to massive regulatory liabilities and criminal investigation, realizing the legal liabilities of what Walter had done. She stated that if the firm attempted to enforce any claim on my predictive modeling software, Kensington Group would immediately file a public lawsuit, exposing the forgery and the security failures to the industry. The board members stared at the metadata logs in stunned silence. Nicholas Albright looked at the documents, then at me. His face dark with anger. He thanked Victoria for the information and assured her that the matter would be resolved immediately, promising that Walter would be held accountable. 3 days later, Synergy Analytics issued an internal announcement stating that Walter Finch had left the company to pursue other opportunities and that an independent audit of their digital security systems was underway. The board formally waived any potential claims against my software, ensuring my intellectual property was completely secure. This quick resolution prevented a public scandal and allowed Synergy Analytics to preserve their remaining reputation, while Walter Finch was completely stripped of his professional standing 6 months past. My work at the Kensington Group flourished. The predictive analytics model I developed became the cornerstone of our new international division, generating significant revenue and earning praise from our corporate partners. I built a dedicated team of analysts, ensuring a culture of collaboration and mutual respect. My personal life returned to a healthy balance. I was home for dinner every night, and I spent my weekends with my family completely free from the constant anxiety of server alerts. In the autumn, I attended the National Technology Conference in Atlanta, where I was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on predictive modeling to a crowd of over 1,000 industry professionals. As I stood in the speaker preparation room checking my notes, a man entered. It was Walter Finch. He looked significantly older and tired. His suit was slightly worn, his posture slumped, and the arrogance was entirely gone from his face. He cleared his throat and congratulated me on my success. He mentioned that he had been working as an independent consultant since his departure, but that it had been difficult to secure clients. He asked if we might discuss some potential contract opportunities, suggesting we should put the past behind us so he could rebuild his reputation. I looked at him, feeling no anger, only a quiet sense of closure. He stood there in silence. His shoulders slumped as he realized he could no longer use other people's labor to salvage his failing career. I could see the realization in his eyes that his old methods of corporate intimidation and deceit were completely useless now. I told him that there was nothing to discuss. I explained that he had tried to destroy my career to protect his own reputation and that he had failed because he relied on manipulation rather than competence. Walter muttered that I had been lucky, but I replied that luck had nothing to do with it. I told him it was simply a matter of preparation meeting opportunity and that he had never understood the difference. A conference coordinator opened the door, informing me that I was expected on stage. I stepped past Walter, leaving him alone in the quiet room. As I walked out under the bright stage lights to the sound of applause, I saw him walking toward the exit. At the back of the auditorium, his head bowed. My revenge was not born of anger or dramatic confrontation. It was methodical, patient, and absolute. I did not destroy Walter Finch. I simply removed the screen he had hidden behind, allowing the corporate world to see his true character and patterns of deceit. And that was a far more complete resolution than any conflict could ever achieve. I realized then that when you focus on building real value, the people who try to pull you down will eventually defeat themselves through their own greed and lack of integrity. True professional resilience is about outlasting the politics and letting the truth do the work.